Away from that, the federal government may revoke the licenses of Nigeria's 11 electricity distribution companies if they fail to inject new capital within 12 months, as proposed in the Electricity Act Amendment Bill 2025. The bill, now in advanced stages at the National Assembly, is a response to over a decade of poor performance since the 2013 privatization of the power sector. Despite receiving government bailouts and tariff increases, the DisCos have failed to upgrade infrastructure, improve service delivery, or reduce a mounting sector debt of over 4 trillion naira. The bill gives the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission the power to enforce strict recapitalization or initiate a reprivatization process. Critics, however, warn the move could undermine the decentralized electricity framework introduced by the 2023 Electricity Act. We have a development economist and an investment banker, Dr. Nnaemeka Obiariri, join us on the news tonight to make some sense of this. Thank you so much, Dr. Nnaemeka, for joining us on the news.
Thanks for having me.
So from your perspective, why has Nigeria's power sector struggled to improve despite the 2013 privatization?
Okay, I will try to break it down within the next 5 minutes. What happened in 2013 was an aberration. Assets valued at over 3.2 trillion naira were sold to crony capitalists and friends of the government of the day for about $402 billion. Remember that the PSCN was broken into 18 sister companies, 6 GenCos, 1 Transisco, and 11 distribution companies. Basically, most of the people that bought those assets, as at that time, lacked the requisite competencies in terms of financial and technical capacities to manage those assets. Basically, what happened was that the government of the day handed over a 3.2 trillion naira valued assets to some crony and friends of government, and most of them actually purchased those assets through 100% leverage financing. It was a Ponzi act that derailed that sector. No new investments came in. All they just did was just to take over the old assets, began to wine Nigerians and begin to sweat Nigerians and begin to, they began to steal from Nigerians and all the extortions. That is why if you look at most of those DisCos, there are none of them. You will see clearly, even in areas where most of the assets that were sold, if you go to some communities, so go to some places where you have breakdown of transformers or cables, the DisCos will never go there to fix them. They will expect the people to fix those transformers, install transformers, buy wires, buy cables, buy posts, and then they will just come and hook it to the national grid and they will continue extortion. I support the effort of the federal government of Nigeria and the deadline given to those DisCos. If they cannot inject fresh capital into the business, let us reprivatize it and recover it. I am against government interference in private sector investments, but with what we have seen in the power sector, there is need for urgent intervention. Then on the issue of transmission, I expect the federal government of Nigeria to unbundle the Transisco into 6 companies so that each region should have its own transmission network. This issue of national grid breaking down every time is not supportive and cannot support our power transformation program. We must unbundle the transmission companies into 6 places. Let each region control the transmission network that grows within its own region. And then on the issue of the new 2023 Act that allowed the states to generate, to transmit and distribute power under an embedded arrangement, captive power projects, I will advise the governors to seek for deep-pocketed private sector investors to work with.
Okay.
This issue.
Yes, I was going to come in there. Before we even look at investment for the sector, you actually threw your weight behind recapitalization. How are you sure that these companies that are heavily indebted will be able to recapitalize? Where would they get the funds from? We know that these are companies that struggle to maintain their infrastructure and to provide electricity. Who would want to put their money on these DisCos?
Like I said, the power sector in Nigeria is a very lucrative sector. I want to also address the issue of tariff, and I want to appeal to the federal government of Nigeria to totally liberalize the power sector. You know, this idea that we have and A, band B, and band C will not augur well for the development of that sector. All over the world, for that sector to operate and work optimally, we must totally unbundle and remove every form of subsidies on consumption in the power to allow that sector to breathe and work effectively. You know, when I hear the Minister for Power say, oh, even at the level of 225 naira per kilowatt hour, that they are still subsidizing to the tune of about 2 trillion. It breaks my heart because I know, based on thorough studies, based on knowledge of the market, that tariff planned at 225 per kilowatt hour covers a lot of cost and gives good margins for all the stakeholders within that sector. And like you rightly pointed out, those who purchase those 11 DisCos and 6 GenCos must be ready to dilute ownership. Why they've refused to attract fresh capital is because they've refused to bring new investment into those assets. They've not put a part of their money into those assets. They must be willing to dilute their ownership down from the 100% they are holding to about 20% to allow new investors to come in and bring in fresh capital. They cannot continue to hold assets that were practically given to them free of charge and then sabotaging the system. The Nigerian power sector is one sector, fully liberalized, with the huge opportunities within that sector, will attract billions of dollars into this economy under a proper, transparent, and accountable arrangement. So 1 year is not enough. I will advise the federal government to extend the grace period to 2 years. If they are unable to recapitalize, we should take over those assets back and look for deep-pocketed, technical capable investors to manage those assets. The Nigerian power sector tick the right boxes, and until we fix that sector, every of our dream and the visions to industrialize will continue to be a mirage.
Okay, so while we look at what can be done, and we look at vision and probably recommendations, I mean, we are talking about structural and operational flaws in this sector, but then we've not even looked at the deep regulatory issues. So even when we have these lofty ideas and we don't have people who would monitor and ensure probably a transitioning or the phasing of these recommendations that we're hoping for, how do we now get to the end point, the end goal, and that is having DisCos or a sector that works?
I think the Electricity Act of 2023 deepened the system, the industry, and provided some of the check valves like what you were trying to illustrate here. States today are allowed to generate, are allowed to transmit, and are allowed to distribute with an embedded arrangement. I heard the other time, I read that even the Abia State government is negotiating with the Enugu Interstate Company, Enugu, the ones that have the Enugu DisCo, to see how they can sell part of their distribution network in Abia State to Abia State government to enable them handle it. I think that should be also the same advice to most of the states. States like Lagos, states like Abia, states like Anambra, states like Imo, and it's kind of all 30 states in Nigeria. What they should be doing is negotiating even with the current DisCo and GenCo owners on how they can even work together to see that things are done. Regulation is not the issue here. The issue is the issue of good faith. The NERC being able to protect consumers and ensure that the DisCos are doing what they're supposed to do. I do not see the reason why DisCos are not providing transformers, DisCos are not providing meters, DisCos are not providing any infrastructure. All they do is this arbitrary. In fact, by now there should be a law banning arbitrary billing. Every electricity consumer in Nigeria is entitled to digital metering system that will enable them pay what they consume.
Well, we don't know how soon we will get to that point. But then one other thing I'd like us to quickly look at is if we're looking at regional control, so to speak, as you mentioned, because you talked about Lagos and probably 1 or 2 eastern states. What about other regions that have states that do not have quality infrastructure and do not have the mechanics to actually attract the investments that you talked about?
Let me tell you this. There is no state in Nigeria that does not have capacity to attract investments of not less than $2-3-5 billion. There is no state in Nigeria that cannot generate up to 10, 20, 30 billion dollars revenue annually. All we just need is for us to elect thinking and creative governors who understand what governance is and who will be able to put in place enabling security, regulatory infrastructure and governance environment for investment to thrive. I'll give you an example. One of the lowest hanging fruits in Nigeria is the agri sector across the whole agro value chain, both upstream, midstream, downstream, and all the rest of it. Netherlands, with a landmass of 1.5 million hectares, less than 200,000 people in the agri sector, produce and export nothing less than 122 billion euro worth of agro commodities. Niger State has more arable landmass that's almost 60 times what we have in Netherlands. The governor of Niger State, smart thinking and creative thinking, working with the private sector, can create a humongous $200 billion economy in Niger State that will attract all the investments. Let me tell you, Niger State does not need to. There are different sources of power generation. They can use hydro. They can use turbine. They can even use solar. There are different ways. Even bio waste. I have advised them on how they can set up agro parks that will be censored, that will generate enough power to serve those agro parks and sell power to the communities. We have templated things that the governments at the state level can do. We take the intervention of the federal government to generate and distribute their own power and drive industrialization and economic development in their state. Can I repeat again? There is no state in Nigeria that cannot generate between 10 to 20 billion dollars annually if the governors are serious.
So basically, it's all about putting up the frameworks to achieve these illustrious ideas that you've brought on board. Thank you so much, Dr. Inaemeka Obiariri, for sharing your thoughts with us on the news.
Thanks for having me.